topic today is the Great Falling Away. This is such a commonly used term that people will often refer to it with an acronym, GFA. And so in prophecy circles, you will often see people writing and they will just say GFA because everybody knows we're talking about the Great Falling Away. And that's our topic today. So the Great Falling Away comes from a few references in the Bible to a specific event. And in this event, God's people en masse turn away from God. Now, there's been lots of times in history where people have turned away from God and then God brings them back. But this one is going to be notable in that it happens at a particular time and for a particular reason. And a lot of people get confused about this. They think that they're looking at declining church attendance right now in North America. They might say, oh, this is the Great Falling Away. Well, no, it's not, because the Bible specifically says when this is going to happen because it tells you how it's going to happen, what's going to be the cause of it. And you don't get the detail, and we'll see in the verses that we're not going to have the kind of detail we would like to see about the cause of it. And we'll think about that some, but we know for sure what the cause is, and therefore we know who's doing it, and we know the time period when this is going to happen. And so it's going to be a very short time period in which this turning away happens, and it's going to be for a particular reason. So it comes from, and the whole name, the Great Falling Away, comes from 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 3 in the King James Version. Other versions say it differently, and we'll look at that. But in the King James Version, it says, let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come except there come a great fall, no, not great, a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition. And so the great part of that people have added because it is a notable falling away. It's not like other falling away that have happened in the past in the Bible. This one is called the Great Falling Away because it's unique and the greatness of it. So other translations, more recent translations, use different words for that. There's one here from ANT that uses the word revolt, which is really meaning the same thing. It's a revolt against God. The people of God have revolted against him and turned away from him. And so from the NIV, it uses a rebellion, which is meaning the same thing, really. It's people rebelling against God, saying, no, we're not going to have you as God anymore. And from NASB, they use the word apostasy, which really means the same thing as well. So all of these are different words that mean the same thing. It's a great turning away from God, and that's what this message is going to be all about. And so Jesus describes the cause of it, and I said at the start of it that there is a specific cause for this, but we don't have any detail for that. And so Jesus spoke of this event when he was discussing a whole chain of future events that were going to be coming. And the three of the Gospels cover this. Matthew, Mark, and Luke cover this. And they describe it a little differently. We're going to look at Matthew and Mark here. And so Matthew says, and then they will deliver you to suffering, and they will kill you, and you will be hated by all the nations because of my name. Then many will be subverted, and they will hate one another, and will betray one another, and many false prophets will arise and will deceive many. Okay, so this one mentions the false prophets, but doesn't directly link it. The verses in Mark really links them together better. So let's look at that one. It says, and false messiahs and lying prophets will arise, and they will give signs and wonders, and they will deceive, if possible, even the chosen ones. But pay attention. Behold, I have anticipated this. I have told you everything. Now remember that. Pay attention. Behold, I have anticipated this. I've told you everything. Jesus says this. We'll come back to that later on. So what we do see here, though, is this is being driven by false messiahs and lying prophets who are somehow causing God's people to turn away. So Revelation also talks about this, but of course Revelation talks about it in symbolic terms and describes this event that way. And so it's a lot harder to figure out that Revelation is actually describing that. And I'm not going to go into how it describes that or where, just to keep this short. But what Revelation does indicate is that 1/3 of the people who are strong in faith, strong in their faith in God, will lose faith to some degree, maybe to a small degree or to a greater degree, maybe all the way out. And so 1/3 of those who are the elders, the elect, the strong in faith, are going to lose faith to some degree. But worse than that, most of those who are weak in the faith will be lost completely and gone. And so that's how serious this is. We're talking about something like 1/3 of the people who are Christians turning away. And that's a shocking number, and happening in a short period of time, and across multiple countries. That's a really hard thing to grasp, because you can easily imagine that, for example, America might be falling away right now, but there might be other countries that are making up for it because they're turning to God. But this is going to be a worldwide 1/3 that is going to be lost. In addition to those who are in the faith, Revelation also talks about 1/3 of unbelievers who are weak unbelievers. They're sort of unbelievers, but they kind of think about God sometimes, and they're sort of on the edge there. Those will completely turn away. 1/3 of those weak believers are going to turn away as well. And so it's affecting not just those who are believers, but those who are unbelievers but are kind of marginal. And also, Revelation talks about 1/3 of teachers and preachers will begin teaching falsely as a result of this. And so that's kind of a shock too. So Revelation really quantifies how bad this is and how big this is, and gives it the word great, if anything. And so we also need to understand that this is a period of testing for God's people. And Revelation really kind of points that out, is that as time comes to an end, God has to separate out the people from the other people. And so on one side, there's going to be God's people. On the other side, there's going to be people who are not God's people. And so he needs to remove those people who are iffy, right in the margin there. So those people who are weak Christians, or they're weak unbelievers, he needs to separate those out and make them really choose which side they're going to be on. And a lot of what happens in Revelation, especially early in the trumpets, that those events are there to do that separation. And so right at the end there, God gives this separation, and then even later, right near just before the second coming, and in fact, while God is still in the air, there is that last chance where God is still trying to pick out those people who would turn to him, and separate them from those people who are iffy. So keep that in mind. That's a big part of what God is doing in the end times. And so we come to the big question here. What would cause this? How can this be possible? We already understand so much that this is tied to the false messiahs and lying prophets who will give signs and wonders, okay? And so if you see somebody who can do some miraculous sign, um, why wouldn't you expect believers to think, aha, you're the evil ones that the Bible talked about. Jesus warned us about you. We're not going to follow you. We know who you are. We're not going to have anything to do with you. And that's what you would expect believers to think, because the Bible covers this so much. It's all over the place. But and so this should be bringing God's people closer to him and saying, oh, the end times are here, the bad guy is here. But instead of that, what happens is the opposite of that. People turn away from God. And so that really is strange. And so you have to ask, well, what more could you do than bring raining fire down from heaven? Well, it does say that the beast will do that, but this isn't something new. Elijah brought down fire from heaven. Satan brought down fire from heaven in Job. So this bringing down fire from heaven isn't some shockingly new thing. And so you would think that Christians would see this as a sign and say, oh, I remember the Bible talked about these people. And so what more could you do to really convince people that this is something that they should follow, and they should turn away from God? If someone was raised from the dead, would that be a bigger thing? Would it be more significant because you would actually raise a dead person alive again? How can this ever be enough to cause a Christian to give up their faith and turn away? And so it's a giant mystery, and there is no answer to this. So we're just going to kind of think about it. And one possibility is that, are the teachings of the church at that time so poor that this comes as a surprise to the people in the church? Are there people in the church who know so little about what Jesus has said is going to happen, and how these deceivers are going to come in and give these false signs and false wonders and tell you that they are in fact God? Why would you have so little understanding of that, except that perhaps the teachings of the church are really that lame at that time? So it's a difficult question to answer. There isn't a question, or isn't an answer to it, but we need to kind of keep this in mind, and always be watchful to apply things that we see in our lives, and ask that question: is this something that prophecy talked about? And make that linkage. People fail to do that, and have in history very many times.